Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and I am joined by Mr. Chris Perkins.
Hello.
You are returned.
I have returned.
Have you assassinated Ari Levitch, and he is no longer going to be going through the guilds of Ravnica?
No. No, I need Ari. I need Ari to cover for me.
That's right.
When I'm not around.
He's done some amazing deep delves into the different guilds and what's happening in Ravnica.
He's the guy.
We are going to return to the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons that you may be a little bit more familiar with, and speak about the terrors of the deep.
Yes, these are forgotten terrors of the deep.
Forgotten ones.
Things that you may not, that have been in the game since the dawn of the game, which you may not know even exist.
Many monsters exist in the similar to our world in that underneath the waters, we didn't know whether there were giant squid or not, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and we're always discovering new things down there.
Yeah, so who knows? Some of these creatures might actually exist.
So these are not the creatures that I'm going to talk about. Aren't wholly their own thing. They are all aquatic variants of existing land-dwelling D&D monsters. They just have cooler names.
Okay.
So the first one is the Lacedon, Lacedon, and it is an aquatic ghoul.
Oh, so it just lives
It is a ghoul
underwater?
that lives underwater. It's a ghoul with basically fins and flippers or that it can use to propel itself. Now, what it is a ghoul of, is it like a merfolk ghoul?
Or an aquatic elf?
No, it's just a human, basically, that has died, become a ghoul, and somehow evolved to live in the deep sea.
And somehow usually is involving magic.
Right. And it made its first appearance in the original, this is not the original, this is the
reprint
of the original Monster Manual.
Yes.
D&D. It is in the ghoul entry. And yes.
They actually were name checked there.
Exactly. So, and all that we know about them from this original tome is that the Lacedon is a marine form of the ghoul. It conforms in all other respects to a ghoul. And now this is a pattern that was established early on by Gary in the book, and maybe it was done, I suspect it was done, to help fill out encounter tables for underwater encounters.
Because they didn't want to be like, a unicorn.
Right. We're not going to put in a bunch of underwater monsters in this book, but we'll give you some underwater variants that you can use should your characters find themselves in the briny depths.
That makes sense.
Another monster that got the aquatic treatment, oddly enough, was the gargoyle.
How does a gargoyle fly underwater?
I don't know, but there is an aquatic gargoyle called a copocenth. This creature is a marine variety of gargoyle which uses its wings to swim. They conform in all respects to a normal gargoyle. They dwell in relatively shallow waters, lairing in undersea caves. So a cave-dwelling gargoyle, I sort of envision from a story point of view, may have been, like, you imagine gargoyles are actually things that perch on buildings. Right? And some of them are animate and evil, and they'll descend down to attack you. Well, it's possible, or you can imagine, old civilizations that have basically sunk into the sea or been dragged down to the depths. Yeah. These sort of underwater ruins that these gargoyles were sort of pulled down into, and through magical means, mysterious or otherwise, they sort of became underwater, which means that now we sort of assume that gargoyles are kind of like elemental creatures. But
because they embodied stone.
Right. Yes, exactly. But these underwater versions of copocenths, they're essentially just gargoyles that happen to live underwater and have learned to use their wings to propel themselves, even though they're made of stone. They're like swimming anchors, basically.
Yeah.
So those are some powerful wings they must have.
They must have really powerful wings. Yeah. And then they also, like, obviously the construction of wings are made so that, air goes faster over one, and then therefore propels it and gives it lift.
Exactly.
I don't think that would happen underwater.
Make a whole lot of sense when you really think about it. There'd have to be something else going on there, like some sort of internal air sac system or something.
Yeah.
But nothing in the codified text in the Copos and in any edition has ever really kind of clarified what that is.
Would you? So it seems like you would lean towards using them the way you were describing how like a ruin had come underground and they are now just underwater versions of gargoyles.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah, but then then why wouldn't they just sink to the bottom?
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're really easy to kill. Good XP.
They're not flying gargoyles.
They're not flying.
Yes. So one other creature that got hey, there's an aquatic alternate, and it's not clear what the rhyme or reason of why certain creatures got this treatment and others did. There may be in some cases, which I'll get to in a moment, there may be a mythological seed or origin there to explain it. But there's an aquatic hobgoblin.
Okay.
Which I guess it's no weirder than an aquatic, a merman or a triton or any locatha or any other aquatic species.
Yeah.
But it's basically a bipedal evil humanoid, a hobgoblin with gills that lives in shallow water, caverns, and sea caves. They use spears and pole arms, which is an interesting choice for an underwater race.
Right. I guess thinking the trident.
I guess they could thrust with a pole arm, I suppose.
Yeah.
They speak their own language, hobgoblin, and they are evil, just like hobgoblins are. They're green, generally speaking, with sort of gills on their faces, and they have gills on their limbs. But otherwise, I sort of envision them as kind of like a riff on the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But gills on their arms, so they can breathe by swimming.
I guess so. Yeah. Or not gills. Sorry, fins.
Fins.
Not gills.
Okay.
Yeah. My bad.
That's all right. I was trying to envision that's an interesting difference. But okay.
Exactly. No, they got gills on their necks and fins on their limbs.
Okay. So they're kind of like the Kevin Costner and the.
In Waterworld?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh God, that film. But if you need an underwater race that's different from, say, the Sahuagin, which are sort of your traditional menacing deep sea race, you can have the shallow sea dwelling coelynths, as they are called, not to be confused with the coposynths, which Merle's admitted to doing recently.
I just like that there's completely new terms.
And they got totally new names.
Rather than just like aquatic hobgoblin.
Exactly. So coelynths are Koalinth. And they are just basically evil hobgoblins of the sea.
And hobgoblins have that kind of martial, thing. And none of the other aquatic races has really kind of fit that that bent. So, there's a use case for these, especially if they wanted to use some of the other lesser creatures like clams or lobsters.
Now granted, lacedons, coposynths, and coelynths haven't been used a great deal over the years, which sort of explains their obscurity.
Yeah.
Partly because I think it does feel like, on the one hand, they are just kind of like a riff on something else. So you would only use them in highly specialized instances where you are just at a loss for what to put in a sea cave.
Right. It's an interesting way to jump into it, but it's hard to do that necessarily unless there's some kind of magical reason for air-breathing characters to suddenly be able to adventure underwater.
Now, the first edition Fiend Folio had an aquatic variant of the Umber Hulk. Kind of another weird one to choose.
That's strange, yeah.
Yeah, and it was called the Vadyanoi.
Vadyanoi.
Yeah.
Way?
And so the Vadyanoi they live in deep rivers and shallow flooded caves and all that kind of business.
Yeah.
And they can burrow, but they don't have the Umber Hulk's confusion gaze.
Oh.
But otherwise they're just Umber Hulks of the sea, and they've got, webbed digits to help them swim, but they have the same sort of burly lichen encrusted carapace that you find on the bug monstery Umber Hulks. They're not umber colored. They're more of a greenish, darkish hue. So they're not aquatic Umber Hulks.
I guess it'd be hard to see underwater anyway. So their coloring could
aquatic
be
other colored Hulks. And they haven't seen much use either. But Vadyanoi is I think it's an Eastern European term for a sort of an evil troll-like creature or menace that lives and pulls people down in to briny lakes and oceans and things like that. So the name has resonance mythologically, even if the creature doesn't. And then the last of the forgotten terrors of the deep that I'm going to touch on is one that actually came not out of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but out of the D&D Expert game, which was an expansion to the D&D Basic game in the days of yore.
Yeah, the blue
exactly,
manuals.
Yeah. And this creature first saw the light of day, and that's sort of going to be a bad pun, in an adventure called The War Rafts of Kron. where it was featured centrally as a villain. And then I think the next time, and maybe the last time it appeared in print, was in a Dungeon magazine adventure in issue 79 called the Acroloth. And this creature is called a Vadya, and it is an aquatic vampire.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you imagine a vampire who doesn't have an aversion to running water,
he's like, I'm cool with it,
and lives in the deep sea, then this is the creature for you. And when you think about it, a vampire is actually a good thing to cross with the dark depths, because what better place for it to live, really, than at the bottom of the ocean, where it doesn't get any light. The sun is not really that much of a problem, and it doesn't need to breathe.
Yeah, and so, there's plenty of, well, not plenty, but you have to hunt. But there are creatures under there that could be your sustenance pretty easily.
Yes, but it's been depicted, like many of these aquatic rifts of land-dwelling races, it's basically the creature, but with like greenish blue skin and fins and gills.
Yeah.
So it's a vampire with fins and gills living in the depths.
Pretty easy to switch that over.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But you could imagine there's some sort of curse involved, like a vampire is being transported over oceans, maybe to get away from its old home in very Dracula-like style. But maybe they threw his coffin overboard and it sank to the bottom of the sea, where it sat for aeons until finally the vampire emerged transformed into this creature or whatever.
Right.
Or found its way to some Atlantean ruin that it turned into its underwater castle, and through the magic of the place became sort of corrupted into this new form.
And was able to.
So there's sort of ways to kind of explain, because you don't imagine, like, Vadyas would not breed because they're undead.
Yeah.
So there would be no traditional means of propagation. So how has this creature existed? There wasn't like a version of it that was alive.
Yeah.
That turned into this. Or maybe there was. Maybe there is a curse of vampirism which comes up out of the sea, drags humans back down to the depths to turn them into Vadyas.
Right. And there's something that's even more terrifying about that vampire myth that involves something crawling up from the depths.
Yes, exactly. I think there's something really there. So I'm hoping that, after this there'll be a rash of Vadya adventures, and we can elevate Vadyas to the stature that they deserve.
That's pretty cool. Well, and you did mention, that's the kind of mythological tie-in there with the Umber Hulk term. But that draw to mind something that I had heard recently, which was the narwhal is a creature that exists. It's kind of weird. Nobody really knows why its horn is the way it is. It's a underwater...
The unicorn of the sea.
The unicorn of the sea. And there is the theory that the reason that narwhal is existing is why people think that unicorns existed. There was the idea put forth, and this is probably early medieval times, that creatures on land had an underwater counterpart. And, if you discover something in the sea, it therefore had a overland counterpart. And so I don't know exactly how that idea became cemented in people's thought, but the fact that narwhals were discovered, it meant that, there must be a horse that has a horn on it. We just haven't seen any yet.
Yes.
And that's where, the myth of unicorns kind of really came from.
I think to some extent it's sort of the myth of the limited imagination. It's like your imagination in that case is sort of bound by what you're familiar with, and you just sort of apply that familiarity everywhere else that you don't know.
Right. But we can do that also as D&D players.
And D&D has a long tradition of doing this.
Yeah, which is, kind of evidented in these creatures. They're basically like, land creatures that have an aquatic version.
D&D does the same thing with space. When Spelljammer came out, there were space versions of classic D&D monsters. So you had, instead of orcs, you had Skro, which is just orcs spelled backwards. Space orcs.
Space orcs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're right. It's a sort of a very common thing to happen, and that humans do, is invent creatures that are counterparts to things they see in other environments.
Yeah. And it almost has this mirror world quality to it as well. And maybe that's where that concept of the unicorn narwhals thing that came from, that idea, like, the idea of the fairy world in our world.
Yes.
Similar to
exactly.
what we've adopted for the Feywild. There's
a propensity in human nature to create symmetry, even if no symmetry exists.
Exactly.
And so you see these sort of symmetrical creations living in alternate worlds and alternate timelines and alternate environments.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the imagination doing its thing. And it's how we ended up with so many of these creatures seeping into the game.
Yeah, and how do you have any advice for dungeon masters on how they can use that, to come up with something that's feels a little bit new or exciting, or perhaps plays with
you can take that idea and you can run with it and create, for instance, an aquatic specimen of something that hasn't been created yet.
Yeah,
anything from like an aquatic treant.
Like a seaweed,
a sea tree, essentially, or like some sort of creeping anemone. Anemone, I should say.
Yeah.
Anemone. Anemone. That's the correct spelling.
We need some more enemies.
Like the aquatic fire elemental, probably not the most likely candidate.
But why not? It'll be the steam elemental.
Yes, but the aquatic purple worm might be fun.
Ooh, I mean that's kind of like a Leviathan kind of idea already.
Yeah. There are obviously naturally creatures that can live in the water, and that's no fun. But if you take something that doesn't normally live in the water and suddenly it does, and you have minotaurs with, flippers and gills, that can be rightly terrifying.
What about some aquatic creatures that could all of a sudden be land creatures as well?
It's a very good question.
Can
you think of any off the top of your head?
I
was just flipping through the book and noticed the Eye of the Deep, which is basically the beholder of the sea.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. They've got 10 periscopes they can put up.
Yep. But creatures like hydras, for instance, already can live in water, so that's not such a big stretch. The trick is to come up with something that seems wholly ill-suited to one clime and then twist it. Water spiders are things actually found in nature. That you can riff on.
Yeah,
that's pretty creepy.
Yeah, well, and there's spiders that create air pockets underwater as well, which I always found super creepy for some reason. That they don't even need. You're not safe underwater from spiders.
Exactly.
They can create their own climate underneath it. But even as you mentioned, like the Sahagwin or the Kuatoa, who are always associated with aquatic nature, but having them show up on top of a mountain for some reason, whether they have been there or been deposited there somehow.
The aquatic bullet, who's basically like a roaming torpedo, would be kind of terrifying.
Yeah. Is it armed?
Can it like pierce through ships or leap onto ships and stomp around? That's kind of terrifying.
And how are we going to weaponize that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody will do that to their players' chagrin.
Jarlaxle's already thinking about doing that.
Yeah.
With his vessel.
Oh yes, the Scarlet Marpanoff.
Excellent, cool. All right, well, if people want to ask you for more aquatic creatures of the deep, lost creatures of the deep, or for some interesting ways to use, to take old creatures, how can they get in touch with you?
They can come at me at Twitter, Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent, we'll look forward to that. We'll be back with another Lore You Should Know segment pretty darn soon.